An old man. A shattered urn. A nation's shame. On a misty morning, 76-year-old veteran John Carter knelt in tears, his comrades' ashes spilled in the dirt. Not by accident, but because a young cemetery guard didn't believe a black soldier could be telling the truth. He looked like a beggar, they said. Those documents were fake. But what happens when that so-called beggar turns out to be the hero who once saved the Secretary of Veterans Affairs? The morning mist clung low to the ground, shrouding the entrance of the National Fallen Soldiers Cemetery in a solemn, ethereal veil. The sprawling rows of white headstones beyond the wrought iron gates were barely visible, hinting at the countless stories of sacrifice resting beneath the hallowed ground. For some, it was a place of quiet reflection. For John Carter, it was a destination that had been decades in the making, a sacred promise he had carried in his heart for half a century. John, now 76 years old, moved with the deliberate slowness of age, his body bearing the quiet scars of a life fully lived, much of it in service. His face, etched with the wisdom of years and the pain of memory, was framed by the brim of an old, faded army cap, a relic from his own days in uniform. It sat comfortably on his head, a symbol of identity as profound as the breath he drew. His shoulders, though slightly stooped, still carried the ghost of a military posture, a testament to discipline and duty. Slung across his shoulder was a worn canvas bag, its fabric soft from years of use. Within it, nestled carefully, was a small, unassuming urn, containing the cremated remains of his dearest friend and comrade. He clutched in his other hand a neatly folded, official-looking document, a certificate of service and sacrifice. The words on it were stark, yet resonated with immense power: Sergeant Thomas Reed, Kia, Battle of Longnan. As John approached the imposing iron gates, each step felt heavy, laden with the weight of a solemn vow. The air, crisp and damp, carried the faint, earthy scent of damp grass and old stone. He paused, looking up at the grand archway, the very threshold of eternal rest. A profound sense of reverence, mingled with a quiet sorrow and a fierce determination, filled him. He reached the small guard booth positioned beside the main gate. A young man, crisp in his freshly pressed uniform, sat inside. He was white, perhaps in his early 20s, his face unlined, his eyes holding the indifferent gaze of someone performing a routine duty. John's voice, though a little rough with age, was clear and steady as he spoke, the words echoing a promise made long ago. "Good morning, son. I'm here to lay my old comrade to rest. Sergeant Thomas Reed." He held out the certificate, his hand trembling slightly, not from weakness, but from the raw emotion stirring within him. "We made a vow, you see. If one of us didn't make it back, the other would bring his remains here, to his rightful place. It's his final resting place." The young guard barely glanced at the certificate. His eyes, devoid of warmth or empathy, swept over John's old cap, his worn clothes, then lingered, undeniably, on the dark hue of John's skin. A dismissive smirk, subtle but unmistakable, touched the corner of his lips. He leaned back in his chair, his posture one of casual arrogance. "Hold on there, old man," the guard drawled, his voice a flat, condescending monotone. "This isn't some public park where you can just bring anyone in. Not everyone gets to be buried here, you know. This is a national cemetery. Sacred ground." His tone implied that John, simply by being who he was, somehow didn't understand the sanctity of the place. He waved a dismissive hand. "And frankly, sir, a lot of people try to fake documents to get their loved ones buried here. Happens all the time. So, where exactly did you get that piece of paper? Looks pretty unofficial to me." His gaze was openly skeptical, challenging. He wasn't seeing a veteran fulfilling a sacred promise, he was seeing a potential scammer, an inconvenience. John felt a familiar, weary sigh well up within him. This was not the first time he had encountered such prejudice, such immediate distrust, such casual disregard for his truth. But today, the stakes were impossibly high. This wasn't about him, it was about Thomas, about a final act of loyalty. He reached into his bag, pulling out more documents, his own military ID, his discharge papers, a faded photograph of himself and Thomas, young and grinning in uniform, taken moments before their last fateful mission. He laid them out on the counter, a quiet, irrefutable mountain of evidence. "Sir," John explained patiently, his voice filled with a desperate earnestness, "these are all official documents. My own service records, verifying my time with Sergeant Reed's unit. This is real. This is his final wish. And mine." The guard glanced at the pile of papers, but his eyes barely registered their authenticity. His gaze snapped back to John, his face hardening, his eyes narrowing with undisguised contempt. The more John offered, the more resistant the guard became, as if the very act of a black man presenting such claims was an affront. "No," the guard suddenly barked, his voice rising, cutting through the misty calm of the morning. His calm arrogance had curdled into outright hostility. "Absolutely not. Look at you. A black man, bringing in some dubious papers. How am I supposed to believe you? You think you can just show up here and make up some story? This isn't a game. Get out of here. Don't try to pull your tricks in front of me." The raw prejudice in his voice, the blatant refusal to even consider the truth, was a punch to John's gut. The accusation of deception, layered with racial bias, was a familiar sting, but today it was unbearable. The weight of his promise, the decades of carrying Thomas's memory, the long journey, all culminating in this cruel, unfeeling rejection. He refused to move. He couldn't. This was Thomas. This was his solemn oath. "Please, son," John pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion, "this is not a trick. This is my solemn vow, my final promise to my brother-in-arms. He saved my life, son. He took a bullet for me. This is my last wish for him. For us." His eyes, normally steady, now pleaded, mirroring the quiet desperation in his voice. "Just let me honor my friend. It's all I ask." The guard, however, saw only persistence, a challenge to his authority, and a further annoyance. His face contorted with exasperation. "You are truly bothersome," he snarled, pushing back his chair. He lunged forward, his hand extended, not to examine the papers, but to physically remove John. With a powerful, unceremonious shove, the young guard pushed John. Already frail with age and emotionally drained, John stumbled backward, caught off balance. He tried to brace himself, but his feet slipped on the damp ground. He fell hard, landing awkwardly on his hip with a painful grunt. His canvas bag, loosened by the impact, slipped from his shoulder. It hit the ground with a soft thud, the contents shifting. The small urn, precious beyond measure, rolled out of the bag. Its lid, unsecured in the violent fall, popped open. A cloud of fine, gray-white ash billowed out, catching the gentle morning breeze. Thomas Reed, reduced to dust, was now scattering across the cold, damp pavement of the cemetery gate. John lay there, sprawled and bruised, his eyes wide with horror as he watched Thomas's remains, his sacred trust, being scattered and defiled by the heartless actions of this arrogant, prejudiced young man. The scene was an unbearable nightmare, a desecration that tore at the very fabric of his being. The promise, the loyalty, the final act of devotion, all of it seemed to be turning to dust before his very eyes. The silence that followed, broken only by the gentle whisper of the wind carrying Thomas's ashes, was more deafening than any explosion. The world tilted and dissolved into a blur of raw, searing pain for John Carter. He lay on the cold, damp pavement of the National Fallen Soldiers Cemetery, his hips screaming in protest from the fall. But the physical agony was a mere whisper compared to the deafening roar of devastation in his soul. His eyes, wide with disbelief and agony, were fixed on the swirling cloud of fine, gray-white ash. Thomas. His brother, his shield, his sacred trust, was scattering across the very ground he was meant to eternally rest upon. The small, velvet-lined urn, now fractured and empty, lay beside him like a broken promise. A piece of its lid, shattered, glinted cruelly in the faint morning light. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, streamed down John's wrinkled cheeks, mingling with the dampness of the mist and the grime of the pavement. He gasped, a choked, desperate sound, as if trying to re-inhale the scattered remnants of his friend. "Thomas, oh, Thomas!" John whispered, his voice a broken lament. He pushed himself up, ignoring the throbbing pain, driven by an instinct far deeper than self-preservation. He crawled forward on his hands and knees, scrambling amidst the scattered ash. His trembling fingers desperately tried to scoop the fine powder, to gather the essence of his friend, but it slipped through his grasp like grains of sand, ephemeral and mocking. Each failed attempt was a fresh stab of agony. He picked up a larger piece of the broken urn, clutching it to his chest, as if holding on to the last tangible fragment of his shattered mission. His eyes, wide and bloodshot, fixed on the young guard, whose face remained a mask of cold, unfeeling indifference. That's the man who took a bullet for me," John cried out, his voice raw with a pain that transcended words. He gestured with his free hand, tears pouring freely now, blurring his vision. "He saved my life. He took the hits meant for me. He was supposed to be here, resting in peace. Not like this." His plea was not just for Thomas, but for the sacred trust that had been so wantonly violated. The young guard, however, remained unmoved. He stood over John, his posture rigid, his face completely devoid of empathy. He looked down at the old veteran, at the scattered ashes, at the broken urn, as if he were observing nothing more than a minor mess, an annoying inconvenience caused by a troublesome old man. "Look, old man," the guard stated, his voice flat, emotionless, a stark contrast to John's raw anguish. He spoke as if delivering a rote recitation. "I was just doing my job. Following procedure. That paperwork you gave me, it looked fake. Suspicious. It's my duty to maintain security. This cemetery is not for, well, it's not for just anyone to bring anyone in. You're causing a disturbance." His words were cold, calculated, a defensive barrier against any shred of responsibility or human compassion. He still saw only an old black man making trouble, not a hero fulfilling a sacred vow. John stared up at him, a profound sense of despair washing over him. The guard's lack of remorse, his unwavering self-righteousness, was more chilling than the morning mist. It was an institutional indifference, a bureaucratic heartlessness, layered on top of casual prejudice. Unknown to both John and the callous guard, their tragic drama was playing out before an unexpected witness. A young soldier, lean and earnest, in his crisp, starched military uniform, was walking by the cemetery gate, heading towards his duty station. He had seen the initial confrontation, the raised voices, the guard's aggressive stance. He had slowed his pace, his curiosity piqued. Then, he saw the shove. He saw the old veteran fall. And his eyes widened in horror as the urn tumbled, the ashes spiraling out onto the pavement. He heard John's heart-wrenching cry, "He took a bullet for me," and the guard's cold, dismissive response. A wave of profound indignation surged through the young soldier. He felt a deep, instinctive pang of anger, a visceral recognition of injustice. This wasn't just a scene, it was a desecration. He quickly, discreetly, pulled out his phone. His fingers flew, recording the raw, heartbreaking spectacle. John Carter, a dignified old man, on his knees, desperately trying to gather the scattered remains of his comrade, while a young, unfeeling guard stood over him, unwavering in his callousness. The footage captured the despair in John's eyes, the trembling of his hands, and the shocking indifference of the authority figure. He filmed the entire sequence, making sure to capture both John's distress and the guard's unyielding demeanor, the shattered urn, the scattered ashes. Once he was sure he had captured every agonizing detail, he carefully lowered his phone. He continued on his way, his mind seething. He couldn't directly intervene in that moment, but he knew exactly what he could do. The moment he reached a place of privacy, his fingers flew across his phone screen. He uploaded the clip to a popular social media platform. He didn't add any elaborate commentary, just a simple, potent caption that cut straight to the heart of the matter. Is this old man a liar? Or is this how America treats its heroes? The video, raw and unfiltered, immediately began to spread. It was a digital wildfire, fanned by outrage. The image of the old black veteran, reduced to tears and kneeling in ashes, while a young white guard stood aloof, ignited a furious debate. People watched, horrified, their anger swelling with each view. The question posed in the caption resonated deeply, striking a nerve across the nation. Comments flooded in, a tsunami of condemnation. This is a disgrace. That old man looks like a true hero, and that guard is a bully. Is this how we treat our veterans? Especially our black veterans? Unacceptable. Find this veteran. We need to make this right. The clip was shared countless times, across platforms, across communities. News outlets, alerted by the viral storm, began to pick up the story, their headlines reflecting the public's outrage. The National Fallen Soldiers Cemetery, an institution built on honor and respect, suddenly found itself at the center of a national scandal, its reputation tarnished by the actions of one prejudiced employee. The quiet despair of John Carter had found its voice, amplified by the power of social media, setting the stage for a reckoning that would shake the very foundations of the cemetery. The viral video, a raw and heart-wrenching depiction of John Carter's humiliation at the cemetery gates, had become a national sensation. It had shattered the quiet indifference that often cloaked bureaucratic systems and shone a harsh, unforgiving light on the casual prejudice many veterans, particularly black veterans, faced. The public outrage, initially a murmur, had swollen into a roaring tempest, demanding answers and accountability. 2 days later, the storm reached its zenith at a solemn Memorial Day ceremony. The event, broadcast live across national networks, was held at a grand amphitheater, filled with dignitaries, military personnel, and grieving families. The keynote speaker was none other than the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, a distinguished former general, known for his unwavering commitment to those who served. He stood tall and resolute at the podium, his voice resonating with tales of valor and sacrifice. As part of the ceremony, a segment dedicated to moments of everyday heroism was scheduled. The giant screens flanking the stage flickered to life, showing various clips of veteran stories, acts of kindness, and quiet moments of remembrance. The audience watched, respectful and moved. Then, a new clip began to play. The grainy, handheld footage, uploaded by the young soldier, filled the immense screens. The initial scene was hazy with morning mist, but the figures quickly became clear, an old black man in a military cap, clutching an urn and a certificate, speaking to a young, indifferent guard. The tension was immediate. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs, standing at the podium, had been momentarily distracted, adjusting his notes. But as the familiar scene unfolded on the screens, he glanced up. His eyes, usually sharp and focused, widened, then narrowed in confusion. He recognized the setting, the gates of the National Fallen Soldiers Cemetery. Then he recognized the old man. His heart gave a terrifying lurch. He saw the young guard sneer, heard his cold dismissal, "Look at you. A black man, how can I believe you?" The secretary's breath hitched. And then, the sickening shove. The old man's fall. The canvas bag tumbling. The urn. The ashes. The ashes. The secretary felt a wave of nausea. He watched, transfixed and horrified, as the old man, John Carter, crumpled to his knees, desperately trying to gather the scattered remains of his comrade. He heard John's broken plea, that's the man who took a bullet for me. And the guard's chilling response, "I was just doing my job." That paperwork looked fake. A cold sweat broke out on the secretary's brow. His hands, gripping the podium, trembled uncontrollably. The entire amphitheater had fallen silent, the collective gasp of the horrified audience echoing through the vast space. No one breathed. Then, a sudden, powerful memory, sharp and unbidden, ripped through the secretary's mind, overriding the shock. 50 years ago. A battlefield in Longin. The deafening roar of enemy fire. His unit pinned down, taking heavy casualties. A flash of a powerful, dark-skinned man, screaming, "Get down, SIR." A heavy, crushing weight as someone tackled him, shoving him into the mud, shielding him. The sound of bullets tearing through flesh, not his own. The acrid smell of blood. And then, the voice of Sergeant Thomas Reed, choked and fading, "Go, sir, get out, cover me." And standing over him, reloading his rifle, covering his retreat, a figure of absolute, unwavering courage, Sergeant John Carter. The same John Carter now on the screen, crawling in the dirt, collecting the desecrated ashes of the very man who had given his life to protect them. To protect him, the young officer he had been then. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs, a man who had faced down hostile fire and political battles with equal resolve, stood utterly, profoundly stunned. His mind reeled. John Carter wasn't just a hero, he was his hero. The man who had saved his life. The man who had faced unthinkable odds with unwavering courage. And this was how the nation, through its own negligence and prejudice, was treating him. He stared at the screen, tears blurring his vision, not just for John, but for Thomas, for all the unsung heroes, for the systemic failures that allowed such a travesty to occur. The weight of his own past, his debt to John, crashed down on him with overwhelming force. He slammed his fist onto the podium, a single, thunderous sound that echoed through the silent amphitheater. "Enough," he roared, his voice thick with a raw, almost uncontrollable fury. The live broadcast captured his face, contorted with rage and a profound, personal grief. "Turn that off," he commanded, pointing a shaking finger at the screens. The video cut to black. He turned to the stunned audience, his eyes blazing, his voice resonating with an authority born of a lifetime of command and a sudden, powerful clarity. "What you have just witnessed," the secretary declared, his voice trembling with indignation, "is not merely an outrage. It is a betrayal. A disgrace. A fundamental failing of everything this nation stands for." He paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "That man," he continued, pointing at the now blank screen, his voice raw with emotion, "is not just an old veteran. He is Sergeant John Carter. A true American hero. A man who, in the hell of Longin, placed himself between me and certain death. He is a man who covered my retreat, who ensured I lived to see another day. He is a man who, for 50 years, has carried a sacred promise to his fallen brother-in-arms, Sergeant Thomas Reed, who died saving us all." The words hit the audience like a physical blow. A collective gasp, then a rising murmur of shock and shame. The sheer, personal connection, the raw emotion of the secretary, elevated the incident from a viral video to a national tragedy. "And how did we treat him?" The secretary's voice rose, filled with a righteous anger. "We threw him to the ground. We scattered the ashes of his fallen comrade. We dismissed him because of the color of his skin, because a heartless, arrogant, and clearly unqualified individual decided he was troublesome and fake." He turned, his gaze fixed on the cameras, speaking directly to the nation. "This is not how we honor our heroes. This is not how we treat those who have sacrificed everything. John Carter is not just a hero, he is a man who kept his sacred oath to the very end of his life. And today, at this very moment, we, as a nation, owe him a profound, public apology. An apology to Sergeant John Carter, before the entire nation." The force of his words, the raw emotion, and the shocking revelation reverberated across the country. News channels cut away from other stories, focusing solely on the secretary's impassioned speech. Social media exploded anew, this time with a unified cry of outrage and solidarity. The hashtag Justice for John Carter hashtag trended worldwide. Public fury, already simmering, now boiled over. At the National Fallen Soldiers Cemetery, the young guard responsible for the incident, watching the broadcast in stunned disbelief, felt a cold dread seep into his very bones. His face, which had been so smug just 2 days prior, was now ghostly pale. He trembled uncontrollably, his career, his very future, crumbling around him. The collective anger of an entire nation, the demands for his immediate imprisonment for his ungrateful and insolent actions, felt like a physical weight pressing down on him. His work, his life as he knew it, was utterly, irrevocably destroyed. Meanwhile, the cemetery management, including the site director, were in a state of frantic panic. Calls from the Department of Veterans Affairs, the White House, and relentless media inquiries bombarded them. The secretary's fury, broadcast live, left no room for denial or delay. They knew they had to act, and they had to act now. Their immediate, desperate mission: find John Carter. They had to reach him, to offer amends, to try and repair the unforgivable damage they had allowed to happen. The weight of national shame rested squarely on their shoulders. The search for the old hero, once dismissed, was now the most urgent task in the nation. The call came quickly, a desperate plea from the National Fallen Soldiers Cemetery management. They found John Carter at his humble home, still reeling from the desecration of Thomas's ashes. He listened, weary but not broken, as the cemetery director, his voice laced with profound shame, offered a public, national apology and begged for the chance to right a grievous wrong. John, ever the dignified soldier, agreed. This was not just for him, but for Thomas, and for all who served. Just 2 days after his humiliation, the very gates that had denied him entry now stood open, welcoming him with solemn respect. John Carter, clad in his meticulously pressed, faded military uniform, stood tall. In his hands, he held a new, pristine urn, draped with a crisp, precisely folded American flag, a symbol of the nation's restored honor. By his side, a solemn escort of uniformed soldiers from the honor guard marched, their faces grave, their steps synchronized. He walked past the very spot where Thomas's ashes had been scattered, past the booth where the young guard had hurled insults. But this time, there was no disdain, no mocking laughter. Only reverent silence and the crisp snap of flags in the breeze. As they reached the section of honor, a place reserved for the most distinguished, the honor guard snapped to attention, saluting him with profound respect. John Carter, fulfilling a promise decades old, finally laid his brother in arms, Sergeant Thomas Reed, to his rightful, eternal rest. Later that day, under the harsh glare of television cameras and the watchful eyes of a repentant nation, the young guard who had tormented John stood before him. His face was a mask of utter despair, his eyes swollen from fear and shame. He had been fired immediately, his career in shambles, his actions condemned by everyone from the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to the outraged public. He stammered a public apology, his voice barely audible, a pathetic counterpoint to John's quiet dignity. John Carter simply nodded, his gaze firm but unvengeful. Justice had been served. The nation had been reminded of its duty to its heroes, and a sacred promise had, at long last, been kept. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any thoughts or opinions about this story, feel free to leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to our channel to support us. Your support means the world. Thank you again.